Let's kick off this explainer with one of history's absolute greatest mysteries. How on earth could a highly advanced ancient mega-civilization leave behind a complex, right-to-left pictographic script that still completely baffles our brightest modern scholars today? It's just wild to think about, isn't it? I mean, we can dig up their entire cities, but we literally still cannot hear their voices. Welcome to the explainer. Today, we're going to take over 2.5 million years of history and distill it down into a fast-paced, highly visual journey. We'll see exactly how each ancient Indian era didn't just fade away into nothing, but directly birthed the next one, creating this amazing continuous chain of human evolution. We've got a ton of ground to cover, so here is our roadmap. We're going to track the journey from the dawn of Indian civilization and the Vedic Age, right through the rise of the Mahajanapadas and the mighty Mauryan Empire. Then, we'll dive into the philosophies of Buddhism and Jainism, before wrapping up with the post-Mauryan era. All right, part 1, the dawn of Indian civilization, from survival to cities. Let's start right at the foundation and look at how humanity leveled up from mere survival mode into becoming the actual architects of the ancient world. The scale of human development here is just staggering. We're zooming all the way from millions of years of nomadic hunting with crude hand axes in the Paleolithic age, straight into the crucial spark of agriculture and settled homes during the Neolithic period around 8000 BC. And then, boom, we hit the Chalcolithic age. Copper tools arrive, early urbanization takes root, and that massive shift from wandering to settling, that is the turning point for absolutely everything that follows. And you know what? That agricultural spark ultimately exploded into the Indus Valley civilization. Flourishing from roughly 3300 BCE, this was literally one of the world's earliest and largest urban cultures, right up there with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. But here's the kicker. What sets this era apart is that it wasn't defined by massive armies or brutal warfare. Instead, it was all about commerce, agriculture, and some seriously stunning architectural foresight. What's truly mind-blowing is the sheer sophistication of these cities. We're talking about grid-patterned streets and underground sewers thousands of years ago. They built massive granaries to stockpile surplus food, a great bath for ceremonies, and even a massive dockyard at Lothal to handle maritime trade with places as far off as Mesopotamia. And the most fascinating part of all this, there is zero evidence of kings, rulers, or military dictators. None. It really seems like merchants and traders were the big players pulling the strings in this highly organized society. Moving on to Section 2, the Vedic Age and the shift to kingship, because eventually those magnificent Indus cities mysteriously declined. So likely due to a mix of climate change, drying rivers, and shifting trade, people migrated to rural areas, and society transformed completely. Just look at this shift. In the early Rig Vedic age, you've got these relatively egalitarian tribal republics called janas, where chiefs had their power checked by assemblies, and everyone worshipped nature gods like Indra and Agni. But fast forward to the later Vedic age, and the whole structure hardens. That flexible society becomes a super rigid, formalized varna, or caste system. Those tribal chiefs turn into powerful hereditary monarchs, and religion suddenly shifts toward elaborate ritual sacrifices, strictly controlled by a powerful priestly class. Which brings us to Section 3, the rise of the Mahajanapadas. Because this new emphasis on absolute kingship and hoarding territory, well, it inevitably led to a massive power struggle. Over centuries, these smaller tribes and kingdoms basically morphed, combined, and conquered each other until they formed 16 massive superpowers, known as the Mahajanapadas. And the main takeaway here is the sheer political diversity. While some places, like Kosala and Avanti, were these ruthless monarchies, others, like Vaji, were actually early examples of elected democratic republics. Pretty cool, right? But out of those 16, one kingdom really rose above the rest. Magadha basically used a ruthless domino effect of dynastic succession to take over. Thanks to a strategic location on the fertile Ganges and a massive military stacked with war elephants, Magadha just absorbed its neighbors one by one. It started with Bimbisara using marriage alliances, moved through the Shushunagas and the heavily armed Nandas, and culminated with Chandragupta seizing absolute control. And that leads us to Section 4, the Mauryan Empire. This represents the absolute peak of ancient political unification. In 321 BCE, driven by the brilliant political and military strategy of his mentor, Chanakya, Chandragupta Maurya overthrew the last Nanda king. He took this completely fragmented map of competing states and basically welded them into a massive, centralized superpower that controlled huge chunks of India, stretching right up into the northwestern territories. But guys, the true narrative twist of the Mauryan Empire comes with his grandson Ashoka the Great. So Ashoka fights the incredibly bloody Kalinga War to expand his territory, right? But the sheer scale of the death and destruction causes him immense remorse. And shockingly, he completely abandons military conquest altogether. He converts to Buddhism and dedicates his vast empire entirely to peace, public welfare, and moral governance, a concept he called Dhamma. Now, before we finish up our timeline, let's look at Section 5, Buddhism and Jainism. We need to understand the philosophical earthquake that actually influenced rulers like Ashoka to change so drastically in the first place. These two incredible philosophies both emerged in the 6th century BCE as direct rebellions against that rigid, ritual-heavy caste system of the later Vedic age. But they offered very contrasting paths to liberation. Buddhism, founded by Gautama Buddha, pushes for a middle way, a balanced approach to ending suffering by eliminating desire. Jainism, on the other hand, championed by Lord Mahavira, goes in a totally different direction. It demands extreme asceticism and an absolute uncompromising commitment to nonviolence, or ahimsa. Let's look a little closer at Buddhism first. It breaks down the human condition with almost clinical precision through the Four Noble Truths. It diagnoses the problem, life involves suffering, and the root cause of that suffering is our own endless desire. But it also gives us the cure. We can achieve nirvana not through some complex exclusionary ritual controlled by priests, but by deliberately untangling our own worldly desires using the Eightfold Path. It was a remarkably egalitarian, accessible message for the time. Meanwhile, Jainism demands intense physical and spiritual discipline. Monks and nuns take these 5 great vows with the absolute core being ahimsa. They introduced such a rigorous standard of nonviolence that even accidentally harming a tiny insect or consuming a root vegetable is avoided. To achieve moksha, which is liberation from the cycle of reincarnation, Jainism requires the complete renunciation of material attachments. We're talking total non-possessiveness here. These philosophies deeply shaped Indian society for sure, but the political wheel just kept turning. So let's wrap up with Section 6, the post-Mauryan era, and see what happened right after the death of the peaceful Emperor Ashoka. Without a remarkably strong central leader to hold everything together, that massive, unified Mauryan Empire inevitably collapsed under its own weight. In 185 BCE, the last emperor, Brihadratha, was actually assassinated by his own commander. And almost overnight, the subcontinent fractured, throwing India right back into an era of competing regional kingdoms. Yet, what is truly fascinating here is that this political fragmentation wasn't a dark age at all. The post-Mauryan period was incredibly vibrant. We see invasions and this amazing cultural fusion with Indo-Greek kingdoms in the north. We see a massive surge in global trade along the Silk Route, connecting India all the way to Central Asia and Rome. Urban centers flourished, advanced coinage systems were introduced, and spectacular new schools of art like Gandhara and Mathura were born. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to consider today. When a seemingly invincible empire like the Maurya shatters into pieces, is it a tragic end? Or is that breakdown actually just the necessary fuel for the next great leap in human history? Thank you so much for exploring the incredible evolution of ancient India with me today. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.